Welcome back to Tumor Board with Hilario and Aneesh. I'm your co-host, Aneesh.
And this is Hilario.
Today's topic, we're going to do a deep dive into the why of choosing medicine. Is it a passion or is it just a job? So Hilario, why don't you tell us, how'd you even get here? Why'd you pick medicine as a career?
Yeah, I mean, medicine, when I was growing up was, this thing that was supposed to be like a noble, profession that you did. Like I mentioned in the, previous episode, right? I grew up in Ghana and in a small village. When we got sick, mostly my great grandmother actually like treated us. So she would get some roots, some leaves. She would sometimes boil them and make like some kind of like tea out of them, right? And
it's like a local kind of village
medicine.
right?
It's like local medicine is what we called it, and it's mostly herbal medicine, right? And that was pretty cool. I mean, at least it worked for me, and we could go into the whole placebo effect and all that kind of stuff. But some of those roots, we know in modern medicine that they contain some of the, compounds that we make modern medicine out of, right? So there's a component of it that actually works, and there's a component of it that I suspect is, placebo, right? But I didn't really think about what I wanted to do in terms of a career until I actually met a doctor, and I was probably like 15 going on to 16.
So this was when you were still in Ghana, right?
Yeah, this is when I was still in Ghana. So I lived in the village for a while, and then when I went to a high school, that was a boarding school, right? But right before I went to high school, I went to live with one of my uncles in another city, right? But they had a hospital. I didn't have a hospital growing up in the village, right? So in that city, that's where I met a doctor for the first time. And really what captured my imagination was that when I got sick when I was little with malaria, right, which is pretty common in Ghana, right?
Right.
My grandmother will, boil this like leaves and roots, and it takes a while before you get better from your malaria, right? So when I went to this hospital in the city, and this doctor, gave me chloroquine, which is the standard of care treatment at the time. It took me maybe a week, and I felt really much, much better, right? Compared to maybe like 3 weeks or so when, I was treated by my great grandmother. And I'm not saying that my great grandmother didn't know what she was doing, but from what she was doing, we got better, right? It just took longer. So was it the disease running its natural course to some extent, right? Or was it because what she was doing was working, but wasn't working very well, right? So getting better in a week from a doctor, giving me chloroquine tablets was very fascinating. And, seeing a doctor, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I think maybe that's something I can do, because up until then, I hadn't really thought about what I was going to do with my education. I knew that I was academically strong because like I did well in school, right? But it wasn't something that I really give much thought to. Yeah. So that was kind of like the beginning of me thinking about medicine in general.
Did you know at the time personally people who had passed from malaria?
Oh yeah. I mean, growing up in the village, there are people who got sick and died from malaria. But the thing I would say is that like this is enough stuff that like I was told when I was little that, hey, this person died from malaria, right? It was something that someone got sick. We didn't know what it was. It was probably malaria or a bunch of other like tropical disease, right? And they try to get treatment at home, right, from either their grandmother or sometimes even their local like priest, right? Their local traditional priest that can do a little bit more than what your grandmother can do in the household, right? And if they didn't get better, that's when they would travel maybe like maybe like a couple 100 miles to the nearest hospital. And when they got to the nearest hospital, and it was too late, they'll say, "Oh, the person didn't make it," right? But nobody really did autopsies, at least when I was growing up, and if they did, they didn't tell me, right? So we knew to some extent that some people were dying from some of these diseases, and I knew, people that probably had malaria. Looking back at some of the symptoms of malaria after going through med school, yeah, I can say, oh, this person probably suffered from malaria, and that's why they died. Yeah.
So you getting better in such a quick time was probably a really big deal for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal because I think like one of the things about malaria is that like it can progress, right? Usually it has this like alternating like fever, right? And then sometimes you can get better, feel better, and then the fever will come back again, right? And then in some extreme cases, you can get hemolytic and anemia from it, right? And that's when it can get dangerous for an individual, right? But I think most of us like when we took some form of traditional medicine, or you get some symptomatic management, like you get Tylenol or to kind of help with the fever, and that with time it goes away. But what was remarkable at the time was that I got better. I felt like completely better within a week or so, right?
I can see how that was very impactful,
right? And so maybe a little bit after 2006, which is the first time I saw the doctor, right? We started getting more small clinics within the areas where I grew up, and then they started getting some of those, medicines and kind of helping people out in that way. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to really think about medicine a little bit more. But yeah.
So this was when you were 15. So then did you decide that you wanted to be a doctor, and then that's why you wanted to come to the US?
Yeah, I mean, so at that time, I started thinking, yeah, I want to do medicine, right? But when I was going to high school, I kind of kept my options open because my strongest subject actually, going to high school was chemistry and physics. So biology was probably the third one out of them. So I kept my options open because opportunities are not like there's not a lot of opportunities, right? So if I got engineering in a school in Ghana, I probably would have gone. If I got medicine, I would have gone. So I would have applied to all the different kind of like careers in university, right? Available to me in university, and I would have seen which one really fit for me. But I think with time in high school, that's when I started really thinking a little bit more about medicine and why that may actually be the thing that I really wanted to go to, not engineering, right? Or any other career. I did also, kind of like see some family members that, had, certain ailments like cancer, right? And you get cancer in Ghana for the most part, I would say it's more like a death sentence, right? So you don't really, most people are not getting cured from their cancers, right? Because first of all, there's a problem of access, right? Even in the cities, right? It's not as good as you can get it over here in the United States, right? So that kind of got me thinking. It's like, well, there's a real need here, and maybe I can go into medicine, but specifically maybe think about oncology. So I think by the time I was getting to medical school, I was probably thinking a little bit more about like oncology. And there was probably that also added pressure from family that if you're going to be a doctor, you gotta be a surgeon, right? That was another thing that at least I felt to some degree that people wanted me to be a surgeon. So it was surgery and some kind of oncology.
Was there pressure to be a surgeon? Is that so you can go back and help, or is that because they felt that was maybe more prestigious or wanted?
Oh no, I mean I think like in the very classic sense of like Ghana, if you think of a doctor, this is someone who can give you medicines and also operate on you.
Mm.
If you tell them you're going to be a doctor, it's like the way they would describe that to you would be surgeon,
Gotcha.
right? I felt that, at least I felt within my circles of family members and like friends, right, that was really the expectation, that you're going to be some form of like surgeon when you talk about medicine. Yeah. So how about you? I mean, I think last time in the previous episode you mentioned, shadowing a physician, and you got traumatized watching a double mastectomy, right? This was in college, right?
Yeah, that was in college.
And so how was your trajectory from there, and kind of developing your interest in medicine?
Yeah, definitely medicine was on my radar before that. I got some parental pressure to at least look into it, but I had resisted, and I didn't want to look into it because I was, I just didn't feel compelled to. But I did have friends who seemed like they wanted to be a doctor since they were young kids, and it was always like what they wanted to do, and I definitely was not in that category of people. I will say that I was interested in the sciences. I liked chemistry a lot. I liked biology. I had originally thought about getting a degree in pharmacy, maybe doing some type of research or drug development, and that always seemed really interesting to me. But I still wanted to explore my options. So, when I was in college, I was somewhat undecided. But then, yeah, as I mentioned last time, I did do the shadowing program. And I really feel very fortunate that I did, because it really opened my eyes to, to what medicine really is. And the first person I worked with was that breast surgeon. And actually, when I was in clinic, when I think back on it, it seems like they had a multidisciplinary clinic where he saw a patient, and after him, the medical oncologist saw the patient, and after them, radiation oncologist saw the patient. Gotcha. So when I was with him, I actually met a neurosurgeon who I shadowed for a while. I met like an endocrinologist, and I met a radiation oncologist as well. So
you met a rad before you went to med school?
Yeah, I did. Oh, wow. I did. And I spent the summer with him. I really liked what he did. And it was really interesting because until that point, I didn't see anything that I felt really combined more of a scientific knowledge with clinical knowledge than I had until I worked with him. And, I won't mention his name, but we kept in touch. He actually wrote a letter of recommendation for my residency application.
Oh, wow.
But that was my first introduction to radiation oncology.
So this person was like a mentor to you, right?
Yeah, he was a mentor. And I think my experience with him definitely convinced me to apply to medical school. But at the time, I was very undecided. I didn't know what specialty, and it was only really, after going through everything, then I decided on radonc. But it definitely stimulated my interest in cancer for sure. I, in my life, don't have anyone that's personally impacted me in terms of their own diagnosis of cancer, but I just being with those patients definitely convinced me to kind of go down that route.
Gotcha. So for the, I guess, the people listening that might be interested in going to medical school, what did you have to do to set you apart for a career in medicine, like getting ready to apply to medical school and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would say that I definitely had to take more credits that I didn't take before. My senior year, my first half of the senior year of college was not as easy as I would have liked because I was a little behind on those classes. But I think, they're really looking for people who are ready to work diligently, who can be focused, who can adapt to various situations and environments. And that comes with different experiences, extracurricular experiences that you're in, but also comes with, making sure that you can handle a course load that they feel is appropriate.
Right. Right.
And I would say nowadays, they want people to be leaders and team players. I think the team environment is such an important thing in medicine,
Right.
and they want people to have other experiences. Maybe you had a different job before. Maybe you have an experience that can translate to being a good physician with good bedside manner and who's empathetic and caring for your patient.
Right. I remember like when I was applying to med school, the big thing was volunteering experience, right?
Yeah.
I did spend quite a bit of a time in the VA medical center locally, and it was a good time actually. I did not know much about the medicine that was going on the floor, but being in that environment and some of the things that I experienced, watching the doctors, even doing some of their rounds with them, with their residents, I thought that was interesting and kind of gave me the sense of, oh, this is really what I want to do. I later on found out I didn't like rounding, but rounding with them at that time kind of gave me that, like motivation, because I like how cool they looked, in their white coats and actually like taking care of people in the hospital. That really was inspiring. So it fulfilled, the requirement of getting volunteer experience, and also kind of helped me keep me motivated while I was thinking about actually applying.
So I don't think I've seen you in a white coat in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think like when you're going to med school, you always want to wear a white coat, right? When you're in med school and you start clinicals, you have to wear a white coat, so
you're forced to.
People can identify you and all that kind of stuff in the hospital. But once you're a resident, most of what you do is just like busy work, right? And like running around, right? I just feel like sometimes the white coat can be a little restricting for me. On occasion, though, if I am having a very serious conversation with a patient, right? Let's say we're talking about end of care, I would wear a white coat, because I guess for me, I come in with a presence that like I am being serious about this, and I'm coming with a full knowledge of my professional career and everything that medicine means to me, right? And putting on that white coat, it kind of like puts me in that zone to be able to do that. So sometimes I will wear my white coat before some of this, like sit downs.
Yeah, I do agree. I think families and patients can respond to it a little differently when they do see that. But I also don't wear my white coat often.
Right. Right. So, we covered the part where, if you're someone thinking about med school, right? You gotta take the appropriate classes, and there's usually like a pre-med, like, counselor, like in colleges, right? That can guide you on what kind of classes you need to take. I just remember, hearing that you have to try and get at least A's in, those core subjects like bio, physics, chemistry. Organic chemistry was one that I remember that was such a tedious subject to take, but everyone had to do it, because if you wanted to go to med school, you couldn't do it without organic chemistry.
Tedious is an understatement. I mean, I think, now, at least from what I understand, there's a lot more shift to having people come in who don't have the hard science background. Like, yes, you have to take these prereq courses.
Right, you have to do a postbac, right, for that usually.
Yeah, if you don't have any. But I think they really do like the backgrounds that people bring that are not science-based. And I now practicing, I really do think that can add a lot to not only patient interaction, but also your approach to how overall care should be, healthcare system, things like that.
Right. So yeah, talking about how the system sort of change a little bit, that they encourage people with experiences even in the liberal arts and like other like fields before they get into medicine, right? When I came, it was when I came to the United States, it was purely you get a lot of more like pre-med, like that's a major, right?
Yeah, it's a track.
That's a track that people were were on. They were usually like bio majors, but they were on pre-med track, right? And that's kind of what I that's kind of what I went into. But I did think that even that was a little bit more, there was a little bit more freedom in that versus the way it was in Ghana. So to apply to medical school in Ghana, right, you had to specifically take only certain subjects in high school. This is in high school before you even apply to a college. You apply to medicine at a college level. So you go into medical school in what would be the equivalent of like starting your freshman year in college here, right? And it's not that you're doing just undergraduate classes. You're doing real like medicine, like like anatomy, lab and all that kind of stuff in like a college level class, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that was like you really had to know that you wanted to do medicine when you were in high school to really commit in Ghana, for example, right? And so coming here and realizing that I can do a bio track, right? But I took a lot of history class, I took a lot of philosophy classes, right? And I had that freedom to do that. But you can't really do that, if you're on the track, that kind of track in like a university in Ghana for medicine.
Yeah, I think most countries are like that. You
Right.
decide early you have to take these classes. I think the U.S. it's very more liberal. Like that median age of incoming student, I think continues to go higher every year, just because of how they kind of emphasize those things and allow for that.
Gotcha. So people are a lot older.
Yeah, a little older,
more mature.
Yeah, more
right.
mature. Maybe they've worked for a while. Maybe they didn't decide till later, and then took a post back. Just have a different, non-traditional way of entering medical school.
Yeah. So I feel like I got a sense of kind of your trajectory from going from shadowing in college and maybe applying to medical school. I guess I haven't heard why Aneesh is an oncologist, right? Why did he go into oncology, and specifically why radiation oncology?
So I went into medical school with that prior experience in college in oncology and prior exposure to it. Then when I entered medical school, I tried to tell myself, okay, clean slate. I don't know anything from anything. And I really hadn't shadowed anyone else or really had any exposure to really any other field. And then it was really my third year medical school where we did all the rotations that I was exposed to everything. I'm not going to lie, I didn't really like anything. But they had some, pros and cons, but I wasn't as enthused about even the problems that I was addressing, like the diseases I was addressing outside of cancer. I think my initial experience really influenced me greatly.
Right.
Because I felt, this is a problem that I can address with a specific treatment and help really cure them of their cancer, or even at their end of life in those tough moments, maybe I can help them have a better quality of life.
Oh, that's a pretty noble and very decent what's the reason to go into a field, right? I mean, I feel like you put a lot of thought into why you want oncology, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's also, I just wasn't really interested in anything else, and I there's something wrong with any other issues. Everything's important, but for me, I felt a little bored when addressing them. I didn't feel like I really had much of an impact on either them or their lives in any way. I felt that some issues such as diabetes or hypertension were just so chronic. It wasn't something I was very enthusiastic about addressing over the course of someone's lifetime. I really wanted to have a problem in front of me and address it with a treatment at that time.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I guess in a sense, I understand what you're saying, right? There is the likelihood of being able to cure cancer, right? Depending on the stage that it is found, right? And what you offer the patient and all that. There is a sense in which that cancer becoming a chronic disease actually might be good for some patients who, especially in diseases where they often died from it, right? So
right.
you might be seeing, I guess what I'm saying, you might be seeing a little bit more chronic diseases in cancer as the years go by and we advance a little bit more in what we can offer people, right?
Yeah, and what I would say is that is much more exciting as a prospect, because oncology, what really interests me is it really brings into all the basic science that I find interesting, but in a more clinical setting. It uses, anatomy, basic science, pharmaceuticals, radiation, surgery. There's such a multidisciplinary field that I feel like other fields, you learn all this stuff in medical school and you just kind of don't even look at it later on. Not everything, but for a considerable portion. And that kind of scientific aspect and that changing aspect, the field is not there. And a lot of times, the way we treat something like pneumonia or diabetes is the same pretty much of the last 50 years, just maybe a slight change in the technology. And I wanted something that was constantly changing, that the science was changing.
A little bit more dynamic, right?
Yeah, more dynamic, and you get to work with a lot of people.
I think I get what you're saying.
You. Huh? I don't need to convince you.
Oh no! I don't think you need to convince me. Why you want into oncology. I do think I just wanted to understand a little bit more what it is that attracted you to it, and I think I understand what you're saying. And probably one of the reasons why I also went into oncology, right? Like I mentioned, I did kind of experience losing family members, right, from cancer, right? Some of them didn't even know they had cancer, right? And this is me just looking back and through med school realizing that this is what some people were suffering from, right? So that kind of gave me the sense that I probably should do something in oncology, because that is a real need in the kind of the world that I grew up from, right? And then there is the the pressure that I mentioned about you should probably do something in surgery. I don't think anybody said that outright, but it was just that thing that I felt like I was being nudged into the direction of surgery. So in medical school, I just I really just hang around surgical people, right? So I started out in ENT, otolaryngology. I had a great mentor in medical school. I did a lot of basic science lab bench work with her, but she was an ENT, right? And so for a while, maybe the first 2-3 years of med school, I thought I was going to be an ENT, but I could do oncology, I could do head and neck surgery, right? If I went into ENT. And then I realized that surgery wasn't really it for me, right? Because I didn't like being in the OR the amount of time that they were in the OR for, right? I also didn't think in surgery I was going to be able to like tap into some of the other interests that I had in terms of technology, right? In terms of like physics, which I told you was like a favorite subject of mine, right? I didn't really see the chemistry, right? So I started thinking about, kind of like what else can I do, but in oncology, right? And they send me to urology. And it's like, well, that's still a surgical specialty, so it didn't work out. And then I did medicine rotation, right? And I did some, hemonc and medical oncology, like sub-Is, right? And I did not like rounding, right? I didn't like the amount of time they spent doing like paperwork and like just rounding, and it just wasn't the modality that I saw myself doing, right? So I was left with radiation oncology, and luckily enough, one of my few encounters with radiation oncologists was with Dr. Maya and Dr. Weiss, and I felt like they were like real experts in what they did, so they were able to kind of like distill it very well for me, and I really kind of like felt like, oh, this might be the place for me. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe let me hang out with a radiation oncologist and
Mm-hmm.
see how this goes. And um, another thing that really attracted me to radiation oncology was, the personalities in radiation oncology. I thought they were overall one of the kindest, doctors in the hospital. That's true because as a med student, right, you get very intimidated by some of your attendants, right? You spend so much time in college studying so hard, getting all A's, right? Trying to get to medical school. You get to medical school, you're still going into the hospital. You do some biochemistry, you do some anatomy, you do all sort of pharmacology and all that kind of stuff, right? And then 2.5 years later, they drop you off in the hospital, right? And that's when you actually start learning really, how to actually deal with real patients, how to actually interact on a team with with real team members, not what we do in like those OSCEs, and right. So for me, it was important that when I went to the clinical route, that there was someone who was going to, mentor and have that, posture, because have that kind of like apprenticeship, like approach to like, kind of getting me into becoming a clinician, right? And I felt like I didn't get that with the other specialties, and that is just my experience, right? I didn't get that, so they didn't attract me, and
Mm-hmm.
so I ended up in
Right
radiation,
on.
radiation
Yeah.
oncology, and I think I probably made the right choice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I agree. Just hearing you talk, I remember I actually was also interested in urology. I
mhm.
ended up doing research with a urologist. I went to a conference in London to present work on kidney stones.
Oh, really? Oh,
And
that
then
was fun.
eventually, yeah, it was fun. They, med school paid for my trip. I spent 5 days out there.
Hmm.
But I was even thinking about plastic surgery. Then I realized I don't know why I'm thinking about this. It's
Hmm.
really not for me.
Hmm.
Um, but then I spent an elective in radiation oncology at medical school,
Hmm.
and then that really convinced me. That really convinced me to apply. But similar reason to you, good mentors,
Hmm.
cancer, and just
Hmm.
honestly great experience.
Right,
Really.
right. Yeah, and I do think another important thing that I think most students are kind of afraid to mention is work-life balance. Radiation oncologist has one of the best work-life balance that you can find in the hospital when it comes to physicians, right? And that is important. And one of the reasons why I went into radiation oncology was because they were able to actually talk about the fact that work-life balance is an important thing for a physician. And I guess I never really understood the idea of not having healthy, physicians taking care of sick people, right? Like,
Mm.
you know, I do think that being able to have that balance, to be able to unplug from medicine, right, and have rest, and then come back and treat your patients, serves the patients well, and it serves you, the physician, well, right? And unfortunately, because there isn't a lot of like doctors, right, for the population that we have in pretty much any country, right, doctors are typically overworked, right? And so they don't have that balance of work and family life, right? So Radon was one of those that had a very attractive work-life balance, and that is maybe another reason why I went to Radon. So I've given you a lot of reasons why I went to Radon, right? So I mean, those of you thinking about med school, we can certainly talk about some of the things that are happening in Radon, and maybe another episode we can get into the future of Radon and whether this is all a myth or like whether there's some merit to it. But yeah. So I guess the last question before we kind of try and close out is like, so for you, career in medicine, is this supposed to be like a job, or is this supposed to be like a vocation, where you find some fulfillment in doing this, and it's less so about doing a job and getting money out of it versus fully just a passion and getting underpaid, or a mixture of both? And do you feel like you're getting that now in where you're at?
In medical school, at least I felt in my personal experience in medical school, was never talked about really by anyone in terms of how you should view a career in medicine. You study all the time, you miss out on family events and friend events for friends because you have to do your work and be a good student, and that ends up continuing as you progress in your medical career. Maybe not studying for an exam, but hours of shift work, maybe working on weekends, potentially staying home and doing your medical records after work on your own time. All of that really affects your life.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think these topics were really talked about in medical school. I think in medical school, most of the attendings I worked with or who would talk to us as students would say, don't worry, you got to choose what specialty you love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And though that is a valid, I think, advice to choose something you love because you want to go to work and enjoy it, that may not always be conducive to the rest of your life.
Okay.
And for me, I really do enjoy radiation oncology. I'm glad I do
Mm-hmm.
because I can, like you said, have that work-life balance, but in a great job that is fulfilling personally and professionally. But I do think that, some people might love surgery
Mm-hmm.
and might love being in the operating room, but the hours you work may not be conducive to maybe a family life or pursuing passions outside of medicine that someone might be interested in. And I don't think it's wrong to approach medicine as, just a job, because at the end of the day, you do need a job.
Right. So, I mean, if I'm hearing it right, you're saying that some people can love what they do, but it actually might not be a good thing for them because of the other sacrifices they have to make with that thing that they love. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. And I would say a lot of the people in my medical school, personally, I think actually had physicians in their family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were very influenced by them in terms of when they themselves picked their specialties based on their experience with how much their parents worked or really what they told them.
Mm-hmm.
And they told them, hey, you should look into A, B, and C fields because I don't want you to have to do X, Y, and Z. Though I love what I do, you're going to have to make all these sacrifices. Don't do that.
Gotcha. Well, so where does, I guess, like there's something to say that, or there's something noble about sacrifice to me too, as well, right? Like, I like the idea that there are people who sacrifice, their life for others, right? Lay down their lives to some degree for others, right? But you also do think that should be a balance here, and I think that's probably the difficult thing about finding the balance here, right?
I think that for everyone, that balance and that ratio is probably different, and some people get so much enjoyment from their job in medicine. But I would say that for me personally, if I was in the hospital all the time, if I was working all the time, I would not be fulfilled. I wouldn't feel like I could do my job for my patients correctly. But also, I have people I want to spend time with outside. I have interests that I want to pursue, and I would not feel satisfied with my life if it was always working in medicine.
Yeah, and for context, when you say they're in the hospital all the time, people are working like 15 hours a day, kind of thing.
Yeah, they
right?
can work 80 hours, a week.
Yeah. 80 hours, 100 hours. People, that's probably the norm in majority of the hospitals, right? Working more than 80 hours, right?
Yeah, and I think you also want those hours to feel like people, to feel like that you're valued and to feel that you provide value.
Right.
And a lot of those times, even if you work, smaller hours, you may not even get that feeling.
Right.
And I think that's important too when picking a specialty you want to do and picking medicine in general.
Right. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just think that, like, as med students, at least when I was in med school, we this is not something that we'd really get into.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's a lot of like fear about asking, your superiors about this kind of stuff, right? Because rightly so, we might be afraid that they might not take that war. You might come off as, oh, you don't want to do work, right? That's usually the mentality that comes with this kind of like questions, right? And I don't think it's really so much about that. I think it's really like people want fulfillment, but also want healthy lives. And we know that we do have one of the highest mental health issues when it comes as a profession, right? Compared
Yeah.
to other professions. So I do agree with you on that. So where does money fit into all of this, right? Is money play a factor in what kind of specialty you're going into? And we can certainly talk about the opportunity cost and all that kind of stuff, but just briefly, what do you think?
Yeah, I would first say that, I was reading recently, up to 60% of doctors experience burnout, and that's a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really this balance of that quality of life with work. And I think money does play a role. You want to feel like you're compensated appropriately, that you can live a decent lifestyle that you like,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're going to medical school. You have all these loans you may have to pay off,
Right.
and those loans can take a couple decades to pay off, and you will really want to be able to pay it off quickly. So I do think money does play a role in all of that.
Mm-hmm.
In medical school, at least my experience, no one talked about it. You just kind of assumed, okay, surgeons make X amount and other physicians make lower, they make Y amount.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that does play a role in that ratio of money or income to time spent working is important.
Right. Okay. So salary per hour is something that you really look at.
I mean, I didn't particularly look at it, but I do think you just get a general gist. And, if you want to have a comfortable house and you work very hard for this, you work
Right.
really hard, dedicated years and years of schooling, made no income. And I think that, you really want to be able to actually start a job and have a good lifestyle finally.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you may have other obligations. Maybe you have parents you want to take care of. Maybe you have siblings you want to help support. And I think that also does play a role into that income and being able to have that flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is certainly like a bigger topic that we can talk about. What impacts people's specialty choice and the money aspect of it that we don't really talk about in med school. That sounds like another episode to me. I do think that where I was coming from, my background, right? Usually, like the nobility that is associated with medicine was a thing that drove why people went into medicine. It probably was the reason why I went into medicine too. And so I think it probably would have been easier for me to be in that environment where you know I might just pick something because I love it or there's a huge need, right? And I did pick oncology because I think there is a need in in certain places of the world that I come from, right? But I also think that even the choice of what kind of oncology mattered, right? Because if I did surgical oncology, I do think that my work-life balance will look different from radiation oncology, right? So I think that's a scenario where like marrying both interests, right? Work-life balance and the thing that you love, right? Makes sense. I don't know how much money played here, but I will have to say I did look at there's this AMA like website that shows you all the different like salaries, right? And I also looked at my student loan balance, right? And I said, well, how can I pay this off on this kind of salary, right? And so that did factor into it. And luckily, yeah, the answer was yes to me, right? And people think that doctors get paid a huge amount of money and so they shouldn't have any issues paying their student loans. And to some extent, we can have people come and kind of give their opinions about that here, but I do think it matters because a lot of people, finish medical school with almost like 500,000, or residency with almost 500,000 of like, student loans, right? And they build interest over time. It's not that you just 500,000 and just pay it down, right? They keep growing, right? While you're paying them down. So I think it mattered that, what kind of a compensation I was going to get to as well. I wouldn't say that I weighed it as high as what I like to do and my work-life balance, right? So that certainly was something that, kind of influenced it. So I think
Yeah,
it's
I
a mix.
agree with
It's a
that.
mix of like passion, if you want to call it passion. It's a mix of uh people's need, right? And also even the money that I was going to get out of it. I would say that the the passion or even the nobility, the one of the things that doctors are revered in Ghana, right? You respect your doctors, you listen to your doctors, and that may be good or bad. I just think that during the pandemic, that idea, that mentality that I had, that being a doctor, you're part of a noble institution, right? Which I believe that, right? And that comes with some kind of respect. I think that respect part is really out of it because I think I felt disillusioned to see how many people would actually listen to their doctors when we had a pandemic. And that, I think that affected me a little bit in terms of like what my role is in society. So yeah, that's something probably like we can probably dive into about you know having that kind of realization that the thing that you love to do and the thing that you went into because you're considering society's needs is not being seen in the same way as you saw it. And I think that is something that really kind of like sank in during the pandemic for me, and I'm still processing that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's some heavy thoughts.
Yeah.
I would say I do agree. That nobility of medicine. It's like a good thing to do, helping people. That'll plays a role. I think in at least a lot of us, including myself, went into medicine, and why I want to do oncology. Um, and money for me was not the primary thing. I really wanted to pick a field that I liked. So it just so happened that maybe they intertwined a little bit.
Right.
But I do know people who chose specifically a field because of the money it made.
Right.
And I can't fault them for that because they have a certain life they like to live. But at the end of the day, they did choose medicine, and they are going to help people in their conditions. And I think that's okay too.
Yeah, I mean, if it is primarily money, and then sometimes you run into the concern that what they might be offering patients might just be purely financial, right? So I think I think yeah, money can hold a huge component to this too as well, but I think it's imperative that physicians also have that yearning to help people as well.
I agree.
Yeah. So I mean, I think this was a very interesting conversation. Getting to talk about why we chose medicine and some of our motivations behind it, right? So we're going to end this episode here, and next week we do have some interesting conversations to have as well. And Aneesh, is there anything fun or interesting that you've been reading these days? I know you're the reader here, so is there anything that you've been reading that you want to share with some of us?
Yeah, I've been reading a book called The Psychology of Money, and it's really,
I think I know that.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's not Morgan Hauser, is it?
I don't remember the author.
Okay.
It's a thin book. It's not exactly a personal finance book. It's more like a book that he writes stories of both famous people and also not famous people and how they what they did with their money,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of what happened.
Mhm.
And it's all kind of like lessons that you can take away. I mean, how you should manage your money and approach your finances. I really like it. I think it's really interesting. And some of the stories I've never heard. Actually, I haven't heard really any of the stories before. So I would check it out if anyone's interested.
Okay, well, maybe you can share some of
It's
your.
an easy read.
Is it? Are you trying to get me to read it?
It's a very easy read.
Okay. All right. So maybe you can give it to me, and I'll read it after you.
Sure, we'll do it.
All right. So what would we be talking about next week, Aneesh?
So next week, we're going to talk about the preclinical years of medicine and all the ups and downs that are in it.
Okay. All right. So preclinical, you mean like college years, or do you?
I mean like the first 2 years where all you're doing is taking classes.
Oh. Yeah, those are fun times, right?
Yeah, real fun.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
See ya.